Hey Beaks, it's Mr. Boylan, and today I want to talk to you about genetic drift and gene flow as we continue our conversation into population genetics. Okay, so here we go. All right, so natural selection, genetic drift, and gene flow can alter allelic frequencies in a population. Okay, these are the major ways that, remember, we've been talking about the P's and Q's and how those alleles can change in a population over time. Well, these are the three major ways where that can happen. All right, and today we're going to mainly concentrate on genetic drift and gene flow, but we'll start off with a little natural selection review, and we'll come back to this in a future video as well. So for example, here's DDT. You know, DDT is an insecticide. So imagine if you treated like a mosquito population with DDT. Well, any mosquito who lives through that, it's kind of like using bacterial soap, right? Antibacterial soap. Any mosquito that lives through it, well, they'll then have some sort of genetic component perhaps that allowed them to be resistant to the drug, and then as they have kids and reproduce, they propagate that allele to the next generation and it becomes more common, right? So natural selection, pretty easy stuff, and that's how the alleles change, and that leads to adaptive, okay, evolution, but we'll get back into that. So genetic drift, I like to think of the word chance whenever I talk about genetic drift, because this is really a randomness to change in allelic frequencies, okay? And just like when we're doing statistics in biology or lots of different times we're talking about, you really want to have a large population size, especially for a study, right? So genetic drift is going to have a huge effect if the population is small, okay? We want a larger population. So genetic drift describes how allelic frequencies can fluctuate unpredictably, okay, from one generation to the next, and this is going to reduce genetic variation through losses of alleles. So let's take a look at a couple examples here. Here are those flowers again, the incompletely dominant flower where the dominant is red and recessive is white, and then in the heterozygous state there's a blend and it's pink. Well, in this first population here, you can see that only through chance these 5 flowers, okay, their genes made it to the next generation through chance. And now you can see this population here, because of that chance, look at the difference, right? And if you looked at the allelic frequencies down here, oh, they definitely changed. Evolution is happening in this population. And now let's take a look at genetic drift again, just randomly, just by chance. Only 2 flowers this time in this little population here happen to have their seeds make it to the next generation. And if you look, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Just by chance, it was only the red flowers that reproduced, and now the population has fixed the red allele, right? Until something introduces somebody new or a mutation happens again. So that was just genetic drift. It was just random chance how this happened, right? So that's one example. Just pollen, basically in the air, and it just happened to get lucky here. Let's look at another example here. The island effect, or the founder effect. This occurs when a few individuals become isolated from a larger population, right? And as we explored the earth and you know, formed new civilizations and things like that, this used to happen regularly, but it still does happen, right? It might happen in the future with space, who knows? So allele frequencies in smaller founder populations, okay, can be different from those in the larger parent population. Let's see. For example, Tristan da Cunha, and actually I was researching this a little bit before the video. I kind of want to go here. This is it's known as the most remote habitated or inhabited island in the world. Okay, it's off of Africa, but it's way out in the South Atlantic Sea, and it is beautiful. So I kind of want to get there. Add that to my bucket list. So there was originally 15 original English settlers that went to this island, right? And there were, back when your book was written, about 275 people that are descended from them, okay? And out of that 275 people, 57% of them had asthma. But if you looked at England, where they came from at the time, only 10% of people in England. Huh. So what does that tell us? It tells us genetic drift probably happened. It tells us that in that original founding population, there were more than 10% asthmatics, right? And we know at least 2 were, and 2 out of 15 is greater than 10%, right? And it could have been more. Okay, so it's just genetic drift. It's the founder effect, right? The allelic frequency of this island is certainly different than the parent population, all because of chance. Okay, so here we can see another example of genetic drift, and this is with a disorder called Ellis von Crevald syndrome, okay? And this can happen across many, many different types of people, but it's very high in Amish, right? And we here in Bucks County are not far away from Lancaster County, right? And this happens to be common not too far from us. And what is it? Well, first of all, you're born with extra fingers and toes sometimes, and you have shorter limbs, so it's kind of like a dwarfism, malformed hearts. It's not a fun disease to have, certainly. And well, what's happening here, or why is it more common? 1% of Amish people have this, and that's a way higher number than anywhere else, or any other population in the world. And that's probably because founder effect again, right? The island effect. So Samuel King came from the Netherlands, and he founded the Amish population that now has a higher incidence of this disease than anywhere else. So, there it is. He probably carried it, right? Or maybe he had it. Who knows? But he started the population, or one of the earliest settlers in this population probably had the disease, and now it's more common, just based on chance, right? The island effect, founder effect, just genetic drift. Okay. Here's our next one. It's kind of a sad one, the bottleneck effect. And this is a sudden reduction in population size due to a change in the environment. And this could be us as well. Humans have a real problem with perturbing animal populations. We're always destroying different populations and habitats and things like that. And we've bottlenecked quite a few species and made some go extinct as well. So what's going on here? The resulting gene pool may no longer be reflective of the original population's gene pool. So here you can see the original population, okay? And then what happens is there was a bottlenecking event, okay? And now look at this surviving population. Oh boy. So not necessarily for any reason were these survivors down here selected for, right? This was just random chance, okay? Whether they're founding an island or whatever, this is just a little different, meaning that, there was an event that happened that changed the environment, and now those are the survivors. Okay, so it's still genetic drift because it's completely random, and because now the population is so small, well, now look out, right? Because now you went from a bigger population to a smaller population, and genetic drift is much more effective at changing small populations due to that chance. Right? So bottlenecking effect, and you can see here, late 19th century, the northern elephant seal was hunted to near extinction. Okay, and I could see why. I mean, look at these. Yeah. But anyway, there are fewer than 20 left, and that's not funny. Obviously, we love our organisms on the planet, and biodiversity is very important. So today there are more than 50,000, but many alleles are forever lost, right? So we keep driving these species to extinction through bottleneck events. So you might say, oh, okay, well, now we're going to save this a certain elephant or rhinoceros or something like that. Yay, yeah, but the damage has been done. Once we bottleneck a species, those alleles could be gone forever, right? So it's really important that we preserve the organisms of our planet as best we can. And that's conservation genetics, right? It's a type of biology where we try to maintain variation with programs of breeding and artificial selection, and it's a very important field of biology. Okay, our current textbook, we talk about the greater prairie chicken here, right? And the loss of prairie habitat causes severe reduction in the population size of this chicken. All right, and if you look here, here's Illinois, 1820. Look at the, wow, the range of this bird was all over the state. And then if you look at after humans went and bottlenecked this species, wow, they're not found very many places at all in Illinois, right? And the survivors had very low levels of genetic variation, and only 50% of their eggs were hatching. Wow, so we pulverized this species in Illinois, and those that are left weren't necessarily very healthy. Okay, and we used DNA from museum specimens to compare the variation, okay, before and after the bottleneck, and you can see what's going on here. Look at in Illinois. Wow, before the bottleneck, look at the population size, okay, which wasn't huge, okay, but it's big enough. And the number of alleles per locus, 5.2, and the percentage of eggs hatched, 93. Okay, maybe not the healthiest population around, but doing okay, it looks like. Then look at after the bottlenecking. Now the population size, less than 50. Look at the number of alleles per locus. Whoa, we lost quite a bit. And the percentage of eggs hatched, less than 50. Huh. And that's the problem with bottlenecking, right? And if you look here, Kansas, 1998, okay, they didn't have a bottleneck event. Look at their population size is really big and healthy, and that's similar. That's even better variation than before bottlenecking in Illinois. And then the percentage of eggs hatched, very nice, right? So the prairie chickens in Kansas are doing well. Look at Nebraska, same thing, no bottlenecking, decent population, okay, and then number of alleles looking good again, and pretty good egg hatching rates. Okay, so again, genetic drift, it was just chance. It's not like people picked out up here when they bottlenecked all the healthy ones, right, and tried to get them first. No, it's just random chance that we bottlenecked this species the way that we did in Illinois, and as you can see, it made for a less healthy population. Okay, so let's see the effects here then of genetic drift. So what's the deal with it? Well, it's definitely significant in small populations, much more than large populations, because again of that random chance element, right? This genetic drift causes these allelic frequencies to change at random, completely random. It can lead to loss of genetic variation in a population, right? We just saw that example with the greater prairie chicken and bottlenecking. And this could lead to harmful alleles to become fixed in a population, right? So not necessarily always a good thing here, this genetic drift. Okay, and that'll lead us to the next way that we can switch up our allelic frequencies is gene flow. And this is pretty easy to understand. Gene flow consists of movement of alleles among populations. Alleles can be transferred through the movement of fertile individuals or gametes. So it could just be somebody, right, going from population to population, or something like pollen blown in the wind. And this tends to reduce variation among populations over time. That's a little tricky to understand. Like, for example, look at these two beetle populations, right? If gene flow occurred and this guy here moved to this side, oh, well, then that's reducing the variation because now these two populations would be a little bit more similar, right, than they were before the gene flow. Okay. It can decrease the fitness of a population. Okay, so here we go to Amsterdam again. This is in Holland. I don't even know how you pronounce this. The Dutch island of Boylan, I guess. But you have this bird there, the great tit. Okay, and mating causes gene flow between the central and eastern populations. All right, so if you look here, there's two populations on this island. Okay. Now, immigration from mainland, okay, so coming in here from the Netherlands, it introduces alleles that decrease fitness, which might make sense. You know, maybe these birds in this population are pretty well set up for life on this island, and now here comes some birds, okay, like this little guy here, maybe he flies out to the island. Now, they normally, okay, go to the central population. Okay, so the mainland birds normally go to the central population, and then they start to mate, and that actually decreases the fitness of this population, right? And then natural selection is going to go to work, and it's going to select for better alleles, right? So let's take a look here. Birds in the central region with high mainland immigration have a lower fitness. Again, probably because the birds that came out there aren't necessarily as adapted to life on that island. They're still the same species, right? It's just the populations have been separated. So birds in the east with low mainland immigration have a higher fitness, right? So look at that, all because of gene flow. These poor birds in the central population don't do as well. Whereas in the eastern population, yep, they're still doing okay because they don't get as much of that immigration there. Okay. So it's also possible for gene flow to increase the fitness of a population. Right? Consider, for example, the spread of alleles for resistance to insecticides that we talked about DDT earlier. So we've been using insecticides of all different types for West Nile virus around here, actually, and malaria, right? We have insecticide for that, not that we have to worry about the Anopheles mosquito around us. But the alleles have evolved in some populations that confer insecticide resistance to these mosquitoes, right? So some of these mosquitoes in this population are lucky enough to be born with a genetic component that makes them resistant to these drugs. And what's going to happen again? Well, sure, if they're resistant, natural selection, they'll live through the changing environment of this poison. But what if one of these mosquitoes now flies to a new population? Oh, and starts to mate in that population, there's gene flow, right? And now you just increased the fitness in that population, okay? So another example here, just in the textbook that we use, is copper tolerance allele is seen in bent grass populations. So in bent grass, alleles for copper tolerance are beneficial, but only if you're near copper mines, right? If you're not near a copper mine, you actually don't want this. Okay, so you can actually see how the gene flow spreads there, and actually it's a good thing when the pollen flows near copper mines if you have that allele, and if you don't have that allele, it's good to not have that allele spread back into your population that's away from copper mines. Okay. So, gene flow is an important agent of evolutionary change in human populations, right? And you could talk about natural selection since the dawn of man, or you can talk about genetic drift, just that random change, but certainly gene flow. And look at what we do on this planet. We move all over the place, right? And that's today. Imagine, ever since we started travel, right? Ships and then planes and things like that, and trains moving us all over the place. Pretty wild. Even depending on when you watch this video, there might even be rocket ships bringing us all over the place. Who knows? But point is, gene flow really does change us all up. Now remember, I said gene flow can actually decrease variation, right? So generally, I mean, is it a good thing that we're traveling all over the planet right now? Well, of course it is, right? And it's good to mix it up because remember, when we talked about variation in a population, sexual reproduction has a whole lot of cool stuff. And if you keep mating with people or groups of people with different types of genes, that's actually good for our population. However, with all this gene flow going on, that actually could end up decreasing the variation as well, because now we're not isolated anymore on our own little continents or islands or whatever. And now that it's mixing up, yeah, sure, we might be decreasing our variation. And there you can see maybe that's the new face of America. Right? So here's a little review about the causes of evolutionary change, and I hope this makes sense to you. If I can just start it. Here we go.
We will use a hypothetical insect population to illustrate 4 causes of evolutionary change: genetic drift, gene flow, mutation, and natural selection. Our insect population consists of 100 individuals, some red and some green. The green allele is dominant, capital G. The red allele recessive, little g. The bar graphs show the frequencies of green, capital G, and red, little g, alleles. The frequencies of homozygous dominant, capital G, heterozygous, capital G, little g, and homozygous recessive, little g, individuals. And the number of green and red individuals in the population. Assume that our starting population is at Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Now let's look at some hypothetical scenarios that demonstrate 4 causes of evolutionary change. A windstorm has dramatically reduced our insect population. Such a small population is subject to genetic drift, a random change that occurs in a small gene pool due to sampling errors in the propagation of alleles. It is difficult to predict the allele frequencies from one generation to the next in a small population because chance plays a greater role in allele distribution. By chance, only red alleles were passed on to the next generation. Note that the increase in the frequency of the red allele and red insects had nothing to do with any particular advantage of being that color. The increase was purely due to chance, hence the term genetic drift. Chance occurrences like this are much more likely to affect a small population, like this one.
Gene flow is change in the gene pool due to migration of fertile individuals into or out of a population. Most populations are not completely isolated, and migration of individuals, or gametes as in plant pollen, can alter the gene pool. Mostly green insects left the population, and mostly red insects migrated in from elsewhere, increasing the frequency of the small g allele. As a result, the next generation has more red individuals. Mutations are random changes in an organism's DNA. A new mutation that is transmitted in gametes can immediately change the gene pool by substituting one allele for another. Imagine that we can see mutations happening, shown here by yellow flashes. Mutation can change a red allele into a green one, or a green allele into a red one. In this scenario, mutations slightly increase the proportion of red alleles in the gene pool, and thus red phenotypes in the next generation. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium requires that all individuals in a population be equal in their abilities to survive and reproduce. This condition is probably never met, because individuals vary and some variants leave more offspring than others. This differential reproductive success is called natural selection. Natural selection increases the frequencies of some alleles and phenotypes and decreases the frequencies of others. Watch the birds preying on the insects. How will predation affect the genetic structure of the next generation and the evolution of the insects? The birds could see the red insects more easily against the background, so they caught a disproportionate number of the red bugs. This reduced the frequency of the red alleles in the gene pool, increased the frequency of green alleles, and similarly altered the relative numbers of green and red individuals in the population. Over time, this process of natural selection adapts a population to its environment. Under pressure of predation, the insects are becoming more and more green.
Okay, so I hope that little review there helped, and I hope that this presentation helped you out a little bit for genetic drift and gene flow. Okay, and that end piece there on natural selection, that'll be our next video. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So if nothing else, I hope I was able to give you some vacation pointers, as I think I want to get to Tristan da Cunha down in that South Atlantic, and then maybe even, I don't know how to pronounce it, but that Vlieland or whatever island off of the Netherlands. You know, there's no cars allowed there at all, and it's just beautiful little single town and sand dunes, things like that. So who knows? Anyway, I hope this was helpful. Take care. Good luck.